Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to session 104 of the Harbour Islamic Study Circle, HISC, where we're continuing with the Battle of Uhud, the second session around the Battle of Uhud, because last time we covered the prelude to the Battle of Uhud, essentially some of the minor expeditions and skirmishes between Badr and Uhud, like Qarqarat al-Qadr, where the Prophet ﷺ did a preemptive attack on Banu Salim, the Prophet ﷺ trying to avenge Abu Sufyan collaborating with Banu Nadir, but having to jettison all his luggage, including as-sawiq, which is some food, to aid their escape. We briefly mentioned the Amr invasion and the invasion of Buhran, and then finally the expedition sent by Prophet ﷺ of Zayd bin Haritha to intercept the caravan that was going along the eastern route towards Iraq, and then joining up with the Syrian trade from that side. But the Prophet ﷺ got early intel about that, and then that was a huge bounty for the Muslims, because it was lightly guarded, and it was unexpected that the Muslims would take that, and that in itself led to the Quraish firmly deciding that they need to do something about their situation. Having said that, it's chronicled that shortly after the Battle of Badr, some of the Quraysh were making plans in earnest for a revenge attack, and they were just looking for the right momentum, and time to do that. And then again, we briefly mentioned that there are four principal reasons around the Battle of Uhud taking place. So there's some religious reasons in terms of the Quraysh now fully entrenched in their hatred of Islam as a religious ideology, and then doubling down on their own polytheism. So there's the religious aspect to the conflict. Then there's the social reasons we talked about, and they first and foremost they needed to avenge their huge losses at Badr. So not just avenge that sort of tribal terms, but they'd lost leadership amongst the Arabs. They'd lost their leaders and leadership amongst the Arabs, and this was a huge embarrassment for the people that had been seen as leaders by the other Arab tribes, to be in this hugely embarrassing situation where they lost to a small band of Muslims, having expelled the Muslims. So there's a lot of pride that's left in it for them to avenge that and to try to regain some of their previous status. And again, people like Ikrimah ibn Abi Jahl and Safwan bin Umayyah, these were people who had that bloodlust. They needed to have the revenge of losing their fathers. And as we've just talked about, was the economic reasons behind the need for a repeat battle. And that is around the fact that trade lines, and trade is the lifeline to the people of Makkah. Trade lines to the north have been cut off because they have to pass near Medina. Trade lines south to the Yemen are potentially in peril because they've been attacked. To the west, to the coastal side, again, most of those tribes and regions have pleaded allegiance to the Prophet ﷺ. So that's not viable. So they have to go the long route through the east and the deserts of the east. So for them to be economically viable, they need to exert or re-exert their authority. And then finally, the political reasons. Now the Prophet ﷺ and the Muslims are a real political threat. Even though they're a small nation at this stage, they're still a political threat. The Islamic State is growing, more tribes are giving their allegiance to the Prophet ﷺ, and that politically needs to be stemmed. So what we got was some really vocal opponents of the Muslims stepping up a gear in Mecca, and it's no surprise that the leaders of these were Abu Sufyan bin Harb, because of we've mentioned that that the losses that took place. It was his caravan that caused Badr. His son was captured by the Muslims. Even though he allegedly got a tit for tat and killed 2 Muslims in the invasion of As-Sawiq, that really doesn't compensate for all the other losses. So he was at the forefront of vying for revenge. Ikrimah ibn Abi Jahl, obviously, because his father and the status that his father had, Safwan ibn Umayyah in Khalaf, and then Abdullah bin Abi Rabia, again, who'd lost his father as well. So these guys, they really started soon after the grieving process had sort of died down, really pumping up and hyping up the people for revenge, and they made it clear that something has to be done. They can't live in this status quo. So what we find is that certainly after the recent Zayd bin Haritha raid, the Quraish had to go around and start really making firm plans for war. So then they reached out to some of the other major tribes, around Mecca, including the tribe of Kinana and Tihama, as well as some desert Bedouin Arabs, the Habish, and they're asked for their assistance in launching this campaign. And again, it was in the interests of some of these other tribes, because they had aligned themselves to the Quraysh. Their trade and their prosperity also depends directly on the prosperity of the Quraysh and their trade. So that's why these tribes specifically were targeted and specifically agreed to support the Quraysh. And the Quraysh were saying, look, lend us money, lend us people, lend us armor, weapons, whatever you can. So these other tribes, rather than supplying their own military fighting men, they'd agreed to supply them some slaves, some saddles, logistics, and military armor. Now, we talked about before the fact that these are trading people or agricultural people. They're not fighting folk, so they don't have armor, and weapons in their houses. These are quite prized possessions. And again, in the story of Ka'b bin al-Ashraf, you can see that these are really prized possessions. They're worth a lot. They're normally from Syria or from Yemen or from these other places. So the Quraysh didn't have that much armor, so again they had to borrow or loan some, and these other tribes were happy to loan them. And I think there were about 200 that were loaned in total. So these other tribes are supporting them. Also, to finance this, they use the profits of the original caravan of Abu Sufyan that caused the Battle of Badr. So Abu Sufyan, because he was head of that caravan, he knew exactly how much wealth there was from the caravan, and who invested, how much they invested, and how much was their return. So he went alongside with Safwan bin Umayyah and with Ikrimah ibn Abi Jahl. they went knocking door to door essentially and saying, look, we want some of that money back. This is how much profit you made from that trip to Syria, and we now want to attack the Muslims. So we know you've got this money, so we want part of it back. So then they also went around trying to convince lots of other people. The most famous one that we'll talk about is Abu Azza. Now, Safwan ibn Umayyah, he pleaded with Abu Azza, because Abu Azza was a poet, and that was his specialty, to come and support them in the war. And Abu Azza initially said no, but then Safwan said, look, if we win, you're going to get so much riches. If you get killed, I will support your daughters if anything happens to you. So don't worry about that. So they forced him, blackmailed him almost into coming to the fight, even though he was one of the very few people at the end of the Battle of Badr who was taken prisoner and released without any ransom. And the condition was that you do not support anyone against the Muslims, and you don't fight against the Muslims. So he was also a part of the army. In addition to that, in total it said there's about 3,000 warriors, of whom 700 were fully, kitted out in their armour. So 700 fully kitted out in their armour as mailed soldiers, 200 mounted on cavalry with 3,000 camels, and between 15 and 24 of the women of the Quraish. So they were part of the marching party. The reason to take some of the ladies, there's numerous reasons. It's not often that they would go to the battlefield. We saw that in the Battle of Badr that they were taken to sing and dance and keep the spirits up of the Quraysh in the Battle of Badr. Here, some of the wives of the notables were going along to march to Medina, and again, part of it is around morale, so increasing the morale. Part of it is around essentially acting as cheerleaders and supporters for the army, and being part of the people singing and dancing. Well, not necessarily dancing, but singing and cajoling people. And part of it is the subtext that goes along with it. One is that we are so confident of victory, we've even brought our women folk. So it's projecting that confidence, and the other people will see it, and your own people in your own army see it, that we are so confident, because obviously you don't want the women folk to be captured, so you wouldn't take them unless you are supremely confident of victory. And the other reason, which again it's noted in some of the other battles, is that it's a way of ensuring that the people fight to the utmost, because you don't want the women captured. So therefore, the menfolk will give their 100%. So it's that added incentive that you've got your ladies with you. So a small group of ladies, again, part of this troop that is marching towards Medina. And this is in Shawwal, so it's a full year after the Battle of Badr. So the Quraysh and all their pomp, they're marching out. Abu Sufyan, he's head of the army. He appoints Khalid bin Walid on his right side as part of the cavalry on the right, Ikrimah ibn Abi Jahl as the cavalry on the left flank, and Bani Abd Dar, they're the ones who were given the flag of war. So it's well orchestrated, and they're marching out. And it said that they set out on the 7th of Shawwal of the third year of Hijrah. So normally a journey like this takes about 2 weeks at a reasonable pace. So Makkah to Medina in those days, a couple of weeks. If you go a bit faster, it can take 10 days. But these guys were really fired up for it, and they basically marched really quickly. A quick march. They got there in 7 days. Now that is very quick even for those times. So the full army with all the provisions going there, those few hundred kilometers, getting there in 7 days. And so they've set out on the 7th of Shawwal. Now Al-Abbass, who is the Prophet's uncle, he'd become a Muslim. Well, he claimed he was a Muslim when he was captured at Badr. And then when the Prophet he sort of confronted him about some hidden wealth that he'd given for to protect him, protect his family should anything happen to him. He was said use that hidden money for ransom, and then he said, "Look, I testify that I am a believer in you now, and you are the Prophet and the Messenger." So he sort of became a proper Muslim after that, but he kept his Islam secret, and he, when the ransom was paid, he went back, but he would secretly give intel to the Prophet ﷺ. So when all of this is being prepared, obviously the Quraish are in a heightened alert. They probably suspicious of Al-Abbass because he's not sort of partaking in all the propaganda to the same extent as everyone else. So they've already got him, flagged that be careful around Al-Abbass. He's not showing the same level of enthusiasm against the Muslims as they would expect after such a crushing defeat. So he's under surveillance already. So it's difficult for him in that situation to dispatch information to the Prophet ﷺ. He'd have to physically send someone, one of his slaves, or anyone that he's doing business with. They're going to be checked. Who are they? What is their interaction? So he has to essentially wait until Makkah is clear. The army has left, and they're left at a safe distance. So once they've left, he now feels it's safe and pertinent to alert the Prophet ﷺ. So then he sends one of his trusted servants to the letter, essentially explaining everything to the Prophet ﷺ. So he goes. Now it normally takes 10 to 14 days. The Quraish, doing it in 7 days. So Al-Abbass has to send his servant to go extremely quickly and to take an alternative route, i.e. a route that avoids the army and avoids the army scouts. Because again, there's always the potential to get caught, and if he's got caught with the letter, then it's really bad news, obviously for the slave and for Al-Abbass. So he has to go a completely different route. So the slave, he makes it to Medina in just over 3 days. So he's basically going flat out. That's as possible as anyone could physically do it in those days. That's as quick as anyone could do it. So 3 days he gets there. So essentially we've got about 3.5 days for the Prophet ﷺ to react to that. So the Prophet ﷺ, the servant finds the Prophet ﷺ in Quba. The Prophet ﷺ used to go to Quba every week, at least once a week. So he hands the Prophet ﷺ, the letter, and the Prophet ﷺ obviously can't read it. So the servant says, look, this is essentially top secret. And the Prophet ﷺ then gets Ubay bin Ka'b to come and read it for him. So Ubay reads and tells him, what's in the letter, as in they've got the army, this is how many in the army, this is when they've set off, this is what they're doing, who's supporting it, etc. All the information is there. So then Ubay gets told by the Prophet, do not tell anyone about this news. So this is completely top secret. No one is to know. This is classified information. Then the Prophet he sends out some spies to essentially verify this information. Now, he trusts Al-Abbass, and he trusts this information, obviously. Even so, he needs to verify this, and he needs to get triangulation of information to it, because if you're undertaking a major intervention, you really need to be completely sure about it. So he's got this information from Al-Abbass. I mean, it could be that the Quraish could have done this to smoke out Al-Abbass or other traitors within Makkah, and they could have double backed, and then the Prophet ﷺ, if that had been the case, the Prophet ﷺ would have then looked very silly, having relied on this information and then set up an army, marched out, and there was no one there. So there was always that potential. So the Prophet ﷺ needed to get in other independent verification. So he sent out Al-Mundhir to get more information to verify this, if they're going on the route where they would be. So in the meantime, he goes to Sa'd ibn Abiyah and meets him in his house. Again, one of the Ansari leaders, quite trusted. And obviously they have a discussion, and the Prophet ﷺ, he asks Sa'd, or shows him the letter, and discusses what they should do. And again, it may have been that Sa'd also recommended getting some more information. So we know Al-Mundhir was sent out, and also a couple of others, Anas and Unis, they were sent out to get this, to verify the information. So Sa'd ibn Abiyah had told the Prophet, okay, these are some of the interim things we need to do. So they included increased vigilance around Medina, increased guards, but doing it in such a way as not to cause panic within Medina until they get more information. Then the Prophet, he leaves, and then I like this story. Sa'd's wife, she then comes to Sa'd and asks him, "Oh, what were you discussing? What were you and the Prophet talking about so privately?" And Sa'd says, "Look, it's none of your business. This was just a secret meeting between the Prophet and me." And he tried to leave it at that. She goes, no, tell me. You can't keep any secrets from me. He goes, look, I can't tell you. It's essentially on a need-to-know basis. And then she says, look, I'll tell you what he said, because she'd been listening. I overheard the Prophet ﷺ say this, and this. And then at the end of that, Sa'd sort of, a face palm moment, he goes, Inna lillah wa inna ilahi raji'un. And obviously we say that when some calamity has befallen us, so to Allah we belong, and to Allah is our return. So then he tells his wife off, tells her don't tell anyone, and he rushes over to the Prophet ﷺ and says, look, bad news, my wife knows, she overheard the conversation, and this is the situation, and I wanted to tell you because in case the information leaked out, I didn't want you to say I was the source, so that there are other people who now know. And so what should I do with my wife? And the Prophet said, no, just leave her, okay? Not to do anything about it. So again, it's great. I mean, the story is great because it shows real dynamics between people in it, and it shows people actually recording this. Even though some of them come out in a poor light, but again, these things are recorded for our purposes. But here you've got the Prophet saying, like, these are state secrets, these are official. This is an official communique. You need to keep these things secret, for the state of the sake. And again, a promise is a promise. It's an amana. It's a trust. So when he's made the promise not to tell, then he needs to stick to that promise. So that's in the background, and then we get. I mean, obviously, it's going to take some time for these spies of Mundhir, Anas, and Munir to report back. They need to go very covertly, find out, assess the situation, and then come back and report. So there's a day or two lost in that journey as well. But they come back and they confirm the news. And again, this shows the meticulous planning of the Prophet ﷺ. Where again he's getting this triangulation of information, and he's showing to us this is important. We as Muslims need to prepare properly. Okay, we shouldn't just panic. We shouldn't act in haste. Right? We should do things in a very considered way. So news gets back from these spies. The intel is that the Quraish are just outside the city, so they don't have much time. So the Prophet ﷺ, he's got a window of maybe a day and a half, 2 days to prepare and do something to make it public and get the preparations ready, because the army left. It's going to take them 7 days. It took just about 3 days for the Abbas's slave to come. Then the spies have to go out and come back and report. So there's a lot of time in that. Then the Prophet ﷺ, it was Friday. There was a janazah, so lots of people were gathered, probably more than you would normally have. And the Prophet ﷺ then addresses them, and this is where he does his famous Shura or consultation. However, there's a difference of opinion about one of the events. According to some chroniclers, like Ibn Ishaq, that the Prophet ﷺ, at the beginning of the meeting where everyone is gathered, he tells them about a dream that he had. According to other chroniclers and Bukhari, he tells them about this dream after Uhud. So there's a difference of opinion when he would tell them about the dream, so as I say, some of the chroniclers say that before the battle he's gathered them all, he told them about the dream, and he said I saw a dream, I was struck with my sword, but my sword broke, and then I hit it again and it came back stronger than it ever was, and I saw some cows. So there's different interpretations of that. There's another version where he says, by Allah, I have a dream and I implore Allah to be a dream of bounty, cows slaughtered, and then there was a groove at the pointed top of my sword, and that I had inserted my hand into an immune armour. So there's various interpretations of that. The interpretation is that some of the cows meant that some of the men would be killed. The groove at the pointed top of the sword is that a member of his house would be hurt. There's obviously the other version of the sword breaking would be that it would be a big defeat. The armor is around Medina. Medina is the armor. So there's dreams are in themselves, or can be, quite cryptic. So there's a difference of opinion whether this dream was explained before or after the Battle of Uhud. Some say that some chroniclers say that the Prophet saw the dream whilst he was in Mecca, and obviously couldn't interpret the dream, didn't know what it meant. But at the Battle of Uhud, realized it, and then he's explaining to the people that, from his opinion, we should fight from within Medina. So that's the context of the dream. Whereas the other chroniclers essentially say there was no. This is not something that he would explain to the people, that we're going to be defeated, we're going to lose men, and we should fight within the city, but you're going against my advice. He wouldn't say all of that before the battle. It doesn't make sense. He would interpret the dream after the Battle of Uhud. Okay, well, I had this dream, this is what it meant, I now understand what it meant. So there is confusion about when he explained this dream to the people. Nevertheless, he gathered them all around, and then he told them what was going on. He said, look, we've got intel that shows that there's an army 3,000 strong, with so many fully armed soldiers, so many horses, camels, etc., and they are 2 days away. We've got news from our intel inside of Mecca, and we've got it verified by people who've infiltrated the army or have seen the army a couple of days away. So tell us what to do. So here the Prophet is going to the Ummah in Medina who were gathered there. Prior to this, he'd just taken specific counsel of his core inner group. Now he widens the advice, or seeking advice to the wider group, because from a Sharia point of view, this impacts on all of them. The question about where to fight is a question of mubah, right? It's a permissible action. It's not necessarily a tactical action, although there are tactical benefits in fighting inside the city, and there are obviously tactical reasons for fighting outside the city. The Prophet ﷺ, he's weighed up these two, and he feels that fighting within the city is beneficial, because the people of Medina, they know the city. The women can fight from the rooftops by throwing things down. The menfolk can create barricades and funnels and target people into certain areas. They know the cities, and they can have a much better hand-to-hand combat inside the city. Medina has never lost a war when it's fought from within the city, and the way the city is made up of small fortresses around the place, and small settlements, that can also be conducive to that type of fighting, and that would allow you to maximize your population and your fighting assets, because they're still outnumbered. I mean, there's 3,000 people coming at this point in time. There are only about 1,000 Muslims, so it can help maximize their army, or the combating force. So there's some of the reasons to fight inside, but this is, as I say, it's not in itself a tactical decision. This is something this is a decision that impacts on the whole community, and it's an area of mubah. Should they fight in or out of the city? There's no Shari imperative on this. So therefore the Prophet ﷺ, he puts it to the people. And the point of Shura is when you've got these issues and you're you're putting it to the people, you then it's essentially it's more than a meaningful vote, it's a binding vote. So whatever the consensus is, whatever your own personal opinion, you have to go by the consensus, because it's a consensus that the people have agreed on, and it's something in the area of mubah that they have a right over. And again, we can infer these things when we're developing our own political theory in terms of when shura should be undertaken and how it should be undertaken and what are the rules around it. Here we're seeing the Prophet ﷺ demonstrating the rules of shura, and it goes beyond just getting advice. So this type of shura, again, it's the decision, the consensus of the community then becomes an obligation for the executive to undertake, and we get that from this interaction. The Prophet ﷺ in the Battle of Uhud, even though he felt his personal opinion was to fight from within Medina, and even Abdullah ibn Ubay al-Salul, he agreed. He said that we should fight from within Medina. And I mean, his reasons weren't that he was there to support the Prophet ﷺ. It's not that he was wanting to big up the Prophet ﷺ's opinion. He knew this was correct from his experience. This was the best way to do it. They could create these barricades, these traps, but more importantly, he didn't want to fight, and this was a way that he could avoid fighting. If the fight is out in the open, it's he has to fight. Here he can hide behind the fact that he's in his house. So he then says that we should fight from within the city. So that was his own personal benefit. However, Allah's plan was that they should fight outside the city, and as a consequence, the Muslims could then see who Abdullah ibn Ubay and the hypocrites were. So Allah's using this as a way to disclose and disgrace in public people like Abdullah ibn Ubay. So they'd been successful in concealing their disbelief and their enmity towards Allah and the Prophet ﷺ. Now it would be uncovered and the veil will be pulled away, and the Muslims would recognize these hypocrites as hypocrites and snakes, as the scholars said that they were. This fifth column, this would not have been exposed had they fought from within Medina. Part of the strategic positioning of Medina that we've talked many times before, on the east and the west we've got the volcanic tracts, and again, if people have been there or if you know what these volcanic tracts are like, they are essentially untraversable. You cannot take an army across these very sharp, jagged, and really, in places quite sort of smooth and treacherous areas. So access to Medina from the east and west is restricted. Uhud is sort of northeast of Medina, or northwest. You've got the mountain of Uhud, and to the south of Medina you've got the marshes and the date palms. So the lush date palms, and again, it's very difficult to get an army to go through these marshes and these date palms. It's so essentially you're forcing the army to approach, and this is why strategic Medina is a great place. We've talked about this before. Any army must then approach it from the one direction. So the process needed to choose whereabouts to fight. But getting back to the discussion, So the Prophet he said that his he first gave his opinion. So he's not one of these people who was sitting on the fence and asking people. Say, look, my preference is that we fight from within Medina. However, I want to hear what you want to say, and I will be bound by the consensus, the decision. So a lot of people who'd actually missed out on the Battle of Badr, Jihad al-Badr, they and again only 313 or so went, so a very small number went. So some of those who'd missed out, they had a sense of bravado, and they were saying, look, O Messenger of Allah, for a long time we've been looking forward to this day, to prove our manliness essentially, and we have implored Allah to make such a day draw near. Thanks to Allah, it's time to fight, so let's go out and fight our enemies, lest they should think that we've lost heart and we dare not fight them. So again, if we remain within the city, they might think that we're not up for the fight, that we're scared to fight. And again, that in itself could be a propaganda coup for them. Whereas the Prophet had a different take on it. So look, if they're camped outside, they will tire themselves out, they will exhaust themselves out, and then they need to decide when to launch the attack and how to do it. So again, you can see there's arguments on both sides, and lots of others, stood up and said, look, why should we stay in our house like cowards? Let us go out and fight. Even Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib, the Prophet's uncle, he was one of those who said, by Allah, who has sent the book down unto you, I will not taste food until I fight them with my sword outside Medina. So what we're getting here is a sense from the crowd, call it groupthink or whatever, the people, that the tide was actually, let's fight them outside, going against the Prophet's preferred option. But interestingly, apart from Abdullah ibn Ubay, it's not recorded that anyone else stood up and argued against this tide of conversation. None of the other elders said, let's stay within Medina. So, and again, you can see in these public gatherings the importance of having good discussion, open and honest discussion, and if it's unless you say things at the right time, you miss the opportunity. So it was, if people didn't stand up and argue against it, and then the time has passed. So now, and much like when the boycott was abrogated, in Makkah, you just had, it was started by one or two people, but they'd arranged these people to sit in the crowd, to stand up and say, look, we were never for the boycott. We were never for the boycott. These are our relatives, and then you get this sense, of things being the tide turning. Same here, that the tide was turning, and it's no good afterwards saying, we should have, you've got to say something, you need to say it there and then. And so what happened then is that, the senior Sahabi, they remained silent. The pressure was on going outside and fighting, and then the Prophet ﷺ then agreed, okay, fine, I will go with the consensus. This is the point of Shura. I will go with the consensus, and we will fight outside the city. And then he went back, and then he started putting on his armour. Again, there's no time to lose. Preparations need to be done now. It's not as if you need to prepare your camel to go for a long fight. You're fighting in home territory, so you don't need that much provision. So he's just going back, putting on his armour. As soon as the Prophet ﷺ leaves, the elder senior Sahabi, they turned around and they started having a go at the younger Sahabi, saying, why were you saying that? The Prophet expressly said he wanted to fight from within the city. You went against him and you pressurized him into changing his mind. This is not the right etiquette. So again, now people are having this intense discussion, and so they made the youngsters feel really guilty that they then told or appointed Hamza bin Abdul Muttalib, who again, he was one of those who wanted to fight outside, so he's the right person to send as your emissary to the Prophet ﷺ, to say, look, we've changed our mind now. So they said, they dispatched Hamza to tell the Prophet ﷺ, we've now changed our mind and we are willing to fight from within Medina. So then Hamza goes to the Prophet ﷺ, and says, they've changed their mind, they've decided to fight within Medina and go along with your original decision. And the Prophet ﷺ, he turns around and says, oh Hamza, it's not befitting or appropriate that once a prophet has started to put his armor on, he takes it off without engaging in battle. Basically saying, look, we made our mind up. We've agreed on this course of action. We can't just change it just because of that. And you make a decision, you need to stick to it. You can't chop and change. And again, as a leader, that shows indecisiveness, and that's not what your followers want. They want you to be decisive, and once you've made the decision, you stick to that decision because at the point in time you thought it was the right decision. So he said, look, it can't happen. We've made the decision, we need to stick to it and play along with it. We've undertaken this thing for the sake of Allah in the best way. So I'm sorry, can't be done. So they have to go out and fight. So finally, to finish off, last couple of minutes, and again, I'll probably recap on this next time. So here we can see some of the benefits of this interaction around where to fight, and we've talked about the status of Shura, when it should be taken in issues of mubah that have an impact on the ummah, and they have a right to be consulted, and their decision should be in cases like this binding. And so the Prophet took it as binding, and then therefore had to act on it, even though it was against his own opinion. But this Prophet is teaching us how to do Shura. So Shura is, this type of technical Shura is different to asking for people's just general opinions and advice, right? What do you suggest? Okay, what in your opinion? That's different. That's not this technical Shura. That's asking advice, but it's not this type of consultative Shura that where you have to do something as a collective based on the collective decision. Okay, so again, when we're discussing with people, we need to bear in mind what level of Shura is this? Are we in a position to do Shura? Do we have a position of authority in order to enact Shura? So it's not just asking for people's advice. This was the head of state on a particular position that affected the Ummah, how best to undertake that, because it was a matter of mubah. So it shows us the way of dealing with Shura, and then having collective responsibility once the decision is being made. Okay. Also, we see the wisdom, or you could say otherwise, how some of the older Sahabi they played it. They didn't want to cause a scene in front of the Prophet and start arguing with the youngsters in front of the Prophet. Okay. Only they could have said to the youngsters, be quiet. Prophet made up his mind, but they let the discussion happen, and then when the Prophet left, then they harshly rebuked these youngsters and said, what have you done? Why have you done that? Can't you see Prophet So you can see how they approach this, and again we get a sense that you know, in some situations when certainly youngsters, you know, they are impetuous, they are rash, they are arrogant, they feel immortal, and this is throughout cultures and societies, throughout the ages. And these youngsters, they wanted to prove something, especially since they weren't at Uhud. So they weren't necessarily listening to the arguments, they were letting their emotions take over. So they had good intentions, they were heading in the right direction, but it was slightly misdirected. Okay, so again, it's important that youngsters, when they trying to make decisions based on the best information and not purely through emotion. And not just youngsters, that's everyone. You know, it's to consider all the facts and to come to an informed choice, not for bravado, not for other reasons of prestige. And again, it also shows that the Prophet ﷺ, he has specific rulings for him, where he says, look, it is not appropriate or befitting that once a prophet has started to put on his armor, he takes it off or he changes his mind. Okay, and we know that the Prophet ﷺ, you know, he would pray tahajjud as an obligation for him to pray tahajjud. For us, it's highly recommended. But the Prophet ﷺ, he had to pray tahajjud, he had to pray with them. You know, he would fast 3 days without eating and drinking. But these are things that he were an obligation on him that he would do that are not for us. Again, something that we'll learn afterwards and we'll come back onto is the advice. No one said afterwards, I told you so, if only you had. You know, look what you've done. Are you happy now? We've lost. Okay? Once the decision was made as a shura, as a collective decision, you make up your mind, you don't look back, you take collective responsibility, you never say, what if only I had done this. As the Prophet said, never say what if, never say if only I had done this, because saying what if opens the door to shaitan. No, none of these people were criticized for their decision. No, there was no comeback on these people, because it was collectively agreed and everyone signed up for that. So Islam tells us that we need to, you know, pray istikhara and do istishara, get advice to make any serious decision. This is what was done at this point in time. So we'll probably quickly revisit that next time, but inshallah we'll talk more about the actual commencement of the battle. So we'll finish there. Finally, do remember the Ummah and us in your du'as, please. And as I say, do subscribe or share this if you found it useful. And inshallah, catch up next time. So we'll finish with Surah Al-Asr. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. جزاك الله خير everybody. Assalamu alaikum.